March 5th, 2026, 1447 local time. The northern Persian Gulf, approximately 31 nautical miles southeast of Kharg Island, Iran's primary crude oil export terminal, and 44 nautical miles southwest of the Iranian port of Bushehr. The early afternoon sky is clear, visibility unlimited. The air temperature 34 degrees Celsius, sea state 1. A flat, glassy surface, broken only by the wake trails of the heaviest commercial maritime traffic corridor in the world. A Q-Max liquefied natural gas carrier, the largest class of LNG vessel afloat, 345 meters in length, 266,000 cubic meters of cargo capacity, carrying a full load of liquefied natural gas at -162 degrees Celsius in 5 insulated membrane tanks, is making 14 knots on a southeast heading toward the Strait of Hormuz. The vessel operates under a Qatari flag, loaded at the Ras Laffan LNG terminal 31 hours ago, bound for a receiving terminal in South Korea. Its cargo, at current market prices, is valued at approximately $180 million. Its insured replacement value, hull, equipment, cargo, is $340 million. Alongside on the vessel's port beam, 900 meters abeam, an Arleigh Burke Flight 2A guided missile destroyer is conducting an armed escort assignment that was established 14 months ago as part of Operation Prosperity Guardian's extension into the northern Persian Gulf following a series of IRGC harassment incidents against LNG carriers in the fourth quarter of 2025. The destroyer has been on escort duty for this specific vessel since 7 a.m. that morning, picked up at the Qatari territorial water boundary, 11 nautical miles to the northeast, running at 12 knots on a converging bearing. 2 IRGC Navy patrol boats are maintaining what the destroyer's watch team has classified as routine surveillance shadowing, a constant presence that has characterized IRGC behavior in the northern Gulf for the past 6 months. The patrol boats are at the outer edge of their standard harassment positioning. They have not closed within 8 nautical miles since 9:30. They have not made any aggressive movements. They are, by every observable metric, doing what IRGC patrol boats do in this sector on a daily basis. They are also providing the targeting solution for what is already in the water. Welcome. I'm your host at Navy Legends, and tonight we are examining the weapon that keeps maritime insurance analysts awake at night in ways that Houthi drones and IRGC cruise missiles do not. The unmanned surface vehicle employed as a precision maritime strike asset against a liquid cargo vessel carrying 266,000 cubic meters of liquefied natural gas in one of the world's most constrained and heavily trafficked waterways. The threat is not hypothetical. Houthi forces have employed explosive unmanned surface vehicles against commercial shipping since 2023. The IRGC has been developing, testing, and evaluating autonomous surface strike systems since at least 2021. Tonight, we examine what happens when that capability is applied with strategic precision against the single category of vessel whose loss would produce consequences extending far beyond the Persian Gulf. This is a fictional simulation. Every technical element described has a documented basis in real systems and real physics. Let's begin. The IRGC Maritime Asymmetric Warfare Command had designated the operation Mosj-e Atash, Wave of Fire. Its planning had begun 11 months earlier, in April 2025, in direct response to the establishment of the U.S. Naval Escort Program for LNG carriers in the northern Gulf. The strategic calculus was specific. The escort program had substantially degraded the effectiveness of IRGC harassment tactics against commercial shipping. Small boat swarms, which had been effective in 2023 and 2024 in slowing transits and driving up insurance premiums, were now countered by the destroyer's presence. A direct missile or torpedo attack on a commercial vessel, while technically feasible, carried escalatory risks that the IRGC leadership was not prepared to absorb. The unmanned surface vehicle offered a different risk profile. It was small. Low radar cross-section, low acoustic signature, low visual profile at sea level. It was autonomous. No IRGC personnel in the operational area during the attack. It was deniable. an unmanned vehicle carrying no identifying markings, constructed from commercially available components supplemented by domestically produced navigation and propulsion systems, offered plausible deniability at the political level, regardless of what intelligence assessment concluded at the technical level. And it was precisely targetable against the specific vulnerability that made an LNG carrier categorically different from any other commercial vessel on the water. The specific vulnerability of an LNG carrier is not its cargo in the conventional sense. Liquefied natural gas at negative 162 degrees Celsius does not ignite in liquid form. It does not explode when exposed to seawater. The energy release scenario that maritime safety engineers study requires a specific sequence. Hull breach at or near a cargo tank. LNG vaporization and mixing with air in the flammable range of 5 to 15% concentration. Then an ignition source. That sequence requires a breach large enough to penetrate the vessel's double hull and rupture the insulated inner membrane tank. The IRGC engineers had solved this with a tandem charge warhead, a shaped charge precursor penetrating the outer hull and void space, followed by a main charge detonating inside the void against the inner hull membrane. Derived from anti-armor tandem warhead technology, adapted for a ship's double hull. Total warhead assembly, 340 kilograms. The unmanned surface vehicle carrying it displaced 4.2 tons, powered by twin diesel outboards capable of 38 knots. 3 such vehicles had been pre-positioned, not in Iranian waters, in a cluster of stationary fishing dhows that had been holding position 9.1 nautical miles east of the LNG carrier's projected track since 6 o'clock that morning. A position selected because it placed the vehicles outside the destroyer's standard forward surveillance radius during the early phase of the escort, and inside the shadow of the Kharg Island radar clutter that degraded the destroyer's SPS-73 surface search radar performance in the northeast quadrant. The 3 unmanned surface vehicles had been submerged, running at 1.2 meters depth on electric motors at 3 knots, connected to the dhows by thin fiber optic tether cables that provided power and command authority, since their deployment at 4:30 that morning. In their submerged configuration, their radar cross-section was 0. Their thermal signature was indistinguishable from the water. Their acoustic signature at 3 knots electric propulsion was below the ambient noise floor of the surface shipping traffic in the area. At 14:47, the IRGC patrol boats, which had maintained their surveillance position 11 nautical miles to the northeast for the preceding 5 hours, their passive electro-optical systems providing continuous position updates on the LNG carrier and its escort, transmitted the attack authorization signal on a burst-encrypted frequency. The signal was received by the fiber optic relay systems aboard the 3 dhows. The tether cables were released. The 3 unmanned surface vehicles surfaced simultaneously, transitioned from electric to diesel propulsion, and accelerated to 34 knots on pre-programmed intercept headings derived from the patrol boat's continuous targeting data. At 34 knots, the 9.1 nautical miles to the LNG carrier's projected intercept position would be covered in approximately 16 minutes. At 14:47:34, 34 seconds after launch, the destroyer's SPS-73 radar detected 3 small high-speed surface contacts emerging from the radar clutter zone northeast of Kharg Island, bearing 043 degrees, range 8.9 nautical miles, speed 34 knots, heading 227 degrees, directly toward the LNG carrier. The watch team's first call was to the bridge. Bridge, combat, 3 high-speed surface contacts bearing 043, range 8.9 miles, closing at 34 knots. Assess possible fast attack craft or armed USVs. Request weapons free. The commanding officer was on the bridge. He processed the geometry in 3 seconds. 34 knots, 8.9 nautical miles, heading toward the LNG carrier. Time to impact on the LNG carrier if the contacts maintained their current heading and speed. Approximately 15 minutes and 40 seconds. Time for the destroyer to close and engage with its Mark 110 57mm gun at effective range. The ship was 900 meters from the LNG carrier. The contacts were approaching from the carrier's starboard forward quarter. the destroyer was on the port beam. The destroyer would need to cross ahead of or behind the LNG carrier to place its gun between the contacts and the carrier. He ordered flank speed and a turn to starboard, crossing ahead of the LNG carrier's bow to position the destroyer between the incoming contacts and the carrier's starboard side. He also ordered the Mark 110 57mm gun to train on the bearing and authorized engagement as soon as the contacts entered effective range. And he broadcast on the emergency frequency. All vessels in the vicinity. 3 high-speed contacts on bearing 043 degrees. Possible hostile intent. All vessels take evasive action. The LNG carrier's master received the broadcast at 14:47:52. He immediately ordered maximum speed. The vessel's emergency full ahead, which would bring it from 14 knots to approximately 18 knots over 4 to 5 minutes, and began a turn to port, attempting to present the carrier's stern rather than its broadside to the approaching contacts. A turn to port also increased the distance from the contact's projected approach line. It was the right call. It would not be fast enough. At 14:49:11, the destroyer cleared the LNG carrier's bow at 24 knots and turned to place itself between the contacts and the carrier's starboard side. The Mk110 gun was on bearing. The contacts were now at 7.1 nautical miles, 12 minutes and 20 seconds from the LNG carrier's new position, accounting for the carrier's course change. The 57mm Mark 110 has an effective range against small fast surface targets of approximately 7 to 10 kilometers. At 7.1 nautical miles, 13.1 kilometers, the contacts were outside effective engagement range by approximately 3 kilometers. The gun could fire. It would not hit at that range against a 34-knot maneuvering target. The commanding officer requested assistance. His call on the formation tactical net reached the nearest additional U.S. naval asset, a second Arleigh Burke destroyer, operating 34 nautical miles to the southeast. At 14:47:58, the second destroyer came to flank speed immediately. It would not close to gun range for 28 minutes. The MH-60R helicopter embarked aboard the escort destroyer was launched at 14:48:22 with a crew of 4 and armed with the M197 20mm cannon in its nose turret. At 140 knots, the helicopter would reach the contact's position in approximately 3 minutes and 40 seconds. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The contacts closed. 6 nautical miles. 5 nautical miles. The destroyer's gun tracked, held. The targeting solution at 5 nautical miles against a 34-knot target was marginal but executable. The commanding officer authorized engagement at 14:50:44. The Mark 110 opened fire at 14:50:47. The 57mm Mark 295 multi-purpose ammunition, a proximity-fused round designed for use against small surface craft and low-flying aircraft, began hitting the water around the lead contact at 14:50:52, walking the rounds onto the target as the fire control system refined its solution. The first confirmed hit on contact 1 occurred at 14:51:04. The USV decelerated abruptly as its propulsion system took fragmentation damage, but did not stop. The drive shaft had been struck but not severed. It continued at approximately 18 knots on its original heading. The second and third contacts, tracking 200 meters behind and to either side of the lead vehicle, were outside the gun's immediate engagement arc as the fire control system was tracking contact 1. The gun slewed to contact 2 at 14:51:11. The MH-60R reached the engagement area at 14:51:14. The pilot's first acquisition was contact 3. The rightmost vehicle, approaching at 22 knots, 3.8 nautical miles from the LNG carrier. The 20mm cannon opened up at 14:51:19. 14 rounds impacted contact 3 across its bow section in a 2.1 second burst. Contact 3 detonated. The detonation was enormous. The 340-kilogram tandem warhead, initiated by the impact-fused precursor charge when the 20mm round struck the vehicle's forward section, produced a fireball 40 meters in diameter and a pressure wave that the MH-60R crew felt through the airframe at 800 meters range. The pilot hauled the helicopter into a hard climbing turn as debris rained across the water. The helicopter sustained minor fragmentation damage to its tail section. 2 holes in the skin. No system failures. Contact 3 was eliminated. Its detonation confirmed the threat assessment definitively. These were not harassment craft. These were armed precision strike vehicles carrying extremely large warheads. The destroyer's gun had shifted to Contact 2 during the helicopter's engagement of Contact 3. It fired 31 rounds in a 4.2-second burst and achieved multiple hits. Contact 2 lost propulsion completely and coasted to a stop. Its motors destroyed, 2.6 nautical miles from the LNG carrier. It did not detonate. The tandem warhead's initiation sequence required vehicle motion, a safety feature preventing detonation during transport. And the now stationary USV presented no further kinetic threat. It would be approached by the ship's rigid inflatable boat and rendered safe 47 minutes later by the explosive ordnance disposal team. Contact 1. Damaged, slowed to 18 knots, its propulsion degraded but functional, had continued its approach through both engagements. At 14:51:31, it was 3.1 nautical miles from the LNG carrier's current position, closing at 18 knots. Time to impact: approximately 10 minutes and 20 seconds. The MH-60R, recovering from its evasive maneuver after Contact 3's detonation, reacquired Contact 1 at 14:51:44. The pilot rolled in for a gun run from the vehicle's stern quarter. The most effective engagement geometry for a surface contact with a forward-mounted warhead. The 20mm gun opened fire at 14:51:49. The first burst of 8 rounds produced no visible effect. The vehicle's stern section, where the motor was housed, was more structurally robust than its bow. The second burst of 11 rounds at 14:51:53 achieved hits on the vehicle's propulsion section. The port motor seized and stopped. The vehicle yawed to port and began circling on its remaining starboard motor at reduced speed, approximately 8 knots on a curving path that was no longer directly approaching the LNG carrier. The third burst of 9 rounds at 14:51:58 hit the vehicle's central body section. Contact 1 detonated at 14:52:01. The fireball was 2.1 nautical miles from the LNG carrier's port bow. The carrier had completed most of its turn to port during the engagement, and the geometry had changed. The blast wave crossed the 2.1 nautical miles of open water and reached the LNG carrier as a pressure pulse that shook the vessel noticeably and triggered its general alarm. No structural damage, no hull breach. The LNG cargo in its membrane tanks remained at -162°C, undisturbed. All 3 contacts were eliminated. No warhead reached the LNG carrier. The engagement had lasted 5 minutes and 14 seconds from first detection to final elimination. It had consumed 57 rounds of 57mm Mark 295 ammunition, 32 rounds of 20mm cannon ammunition, and the operational attention of an MH-60R crew that had flown into a 40-meter fireball's proximity and brought their aircraft home with fragmentation holes in the tail cone. The LNG carrier arrived at the Hormuz transit entry point at 23:14 that evening, 8 hours and 27 minutes behind its original schedule. It transited without further incident. It arrived at its South Korean receiving terminal 19 days later. The immediate consequence of the engagement was not kinetic. The LNG carrier had not been struck. Its cargo had not been compromised. No IRGC surface vessel had been engaged. The patrol boats had remained at 11 nautical miles throughout, technically in international waters, technically not involved in the attack. The unmanned vehicles bore no Iranian markings. The IRGC issued no statement. Iranian state media reported nothing about the engagement for 36 hours, then carried a brief item describing unspecified U.S. military activity in the northern Gulf as a provocation against Iranian sovereignty. The consequence was financial, and it was immediate and severe. Within 4 hours of the engagement becoming public, through a U.S. Navy press release at 17:30, war risk premiums for LNG carrier transits through the Persian Gulf had increased 340%. By the following morning, 3 major LNG shipping companies had suspended northern Gulf transits pending security assessment. Within 48 hours, 8 of 14 LNG carriers scheduled from Ras Laffan to Asian destinations had diverted or rerouted via the Cape of Good Hope, adding 14 days and approximately $2.8 million in additional operational costs per vessel. Global LNG spot prices increased 18% in 48 hours. European natural gas futures moved 22% higher. South Korea issued a formal diplomatic protest to Tehran. Japan's Ministry of Economy convened emergency supply security meetings. 3 unmanned vehicles. Total production cost approximately $2.4 million. Total economic disruption in the 30-day period. Following, assessed at between $28 billion and $47 billion in aggregate additional costs across affected supply chains. The after-action review identified 4 capability and doctrine gaps that the engagement had exposed. The first was the submerged USV detection gap. The 3 vehicles had spent 10 hours and 17 minutes submerged and connected by fiber optic tether within 10 nautical miles of the escort's operating area without detection by any U.S. sensor. The hull-mounted sonar was not optimized for tracking 4.2-ton vehicles, running at 3 knots on electric motors in the surface shipping noise environment of the northern Persian Gulf. Forward-deployed acoustic detection systems, hydrophone arrays or autonomous underwater gliders providing persistent bottom coverage of the northern Gulf transit corridors, were assessed as the most technically feasible counter to the submerged staging approach. The second was the engagement range gap. The 57mm Mark 110's effective range against small high-speed surface targets, approximately 7 to 10 kilometers, was insufficient to establish a comfortable engagement standoff against a 34-knot vehicle closing from 9 nautical miles. A 30mm Mark 46 gun system with higher cyclic rate, or a directed energy weapon providing engagement at the speed of light rather than projectile speed, would have provided substantially more engagement time and margin. The third was the helicopter response time gap. The MH-60R's 3-minute 40-second response from launch to contact was the decisive intervention in the engagement. Without the helicopter, the gun alone would likely not have eliminated all 3 contacts before one reached the LNG carrier. Maintaining a helicopter in hot standby, engines running, crew aboard, cleared to launch immediately on contact detection, rather than cold standby, was assessed as the operationally critical procedure adjustment. The fourth was the Dhows exploitation gap. 3 armed unmanned vehicles had been staged from commercially registered fishing dhows, operating in international waters, without triggering any surveillance threshold that would have generated an interdiction or investigation order. The legal framework governing the inspection of commercial vessels in international waters did not provide authority to board a fishing dhow displaying no hostile intent based on its proximity to a transit corridor. That legal gap was the operational foundation on which the entire IRGC staging concept had been built. The IRGC had not violated international law in staging the attack. The act of launching armed autonomous vehicles against a commercial vessel under escort was an act of aggression. The act of staging those vehicles from a fishing dhow in international waters was not, legally, anything at all. Because the legal framework had not been written with that scenario in mind, this is what Navy Legends identifies as the deepest strategic challenge of the engagement. The IRGC did not build a new missile. It did not develop a new radar-defeating technology. It did not require the kind of sophisticated state-level technical investment that the Hwasong 8 or the Aftab 4 GPS spoofing system required. It took 3 commercially influenced unmanned vehicles, a tandem warhead technology borrowed from anti-armor doctrine, a submerged staging concept that exploited an acoustic detection gap, and a legal framework that had not contemplated this specific combination of elements. And it produced an energy market disruption, measured in the tens of billions of dollars. The LNG carrier's 266,000 cubic meters of liquefied natural gas arrived safely in South Korea. The 5 insulated membrane tanks were offloaded without incident over 14 hours at the Pyeongtaek receiving terminal. The vessel departed for its next loading appointment. The 3 fishing dhows returned to their home port at Bandar Abbas 3 days after the engagement. They were not interdicted. They were not boarded. They had committed no verifiable act of aggression in international waters. Under the laws governing freedom of navigation, they were free to go. They went. Stay informed. Stay vigilant. I'll see you in the next one.